Good morning. This is the Tuesday, January 12th meeting of the Assembly Judiciary Committee. I'm Mike Feuer. I'm the chair of the committee. We do not yet have a quorum of the committee, but we will begin as a subcommittee of the broader committee. As you know, we have some basic rules here. We have two witnesses on each side. We limit them to 2 minutes of testimony each. Why don't we begin with our first item? Number one is SJR number 9 by Senator Keogh, who I know has a pressing engagement elsewhere. Very glad you could join us this morning, Senator Keogh. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I so much appreciate your flexibility in allowing me to take the item up now. Mr. Monning, thank you so much for being here. You know, the Senate is meeting off outside the Capitol, and I don't want to miss a word. I am presenting SJR 9, having to do with the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell at the federal level. And with me are some witnesses in behalf of the resolution. SJR 9 calls on the President and the U.S. Congress to repeal the discriminatory Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy by enacting House Resolution 1283, the Military Readiness Enhancement Act of 2009. That is still pending before the House, so this resolution that you're considering today is timely. Since 1994, Don't Ask, Don't Tell has eroded our national security, frayed our military readiness, and cost taxpayers millions of dollars. Under this policy, more than 13,000 gay, lesbian, bisexual, able-bodied, and willing service members have been discharged, including hundreds who have served in critical operations such as intelligence, language translation, and medicine. Even the Department of Defense's internal studies have concluded that sexual orientation diversity causes no detriment to unit cohesion. 24 other nations allow gays and lesbians to serve openly, including our allies, Great Britain, Australia, Canada, and Israel, and have for years. The United States and Turkey are the only two original NATO members that do not allow gays and lesbians to serve openly in their militaries. Public opinion is changing, in fact, members, faster than Congress. A May 2009 National Gallup poll showed that 69% of all adults and 58% of those who identify as conservatives support allowing gay men and lesbians to serve openly in our military. In the face of the growing federal deficit, continued war spending, and require our troops to fulfill multiple tours of duty in war theaters and in combat, I think it's time that we repealed this policy. It makes no sense for American taxpayers to have spent well over $200 million to discharge able-bodied, trained personnel when we need them so desperately and are asking others to step up for a third or fourth tour of duty. According to the Urban Institute, there are currently an estimated 65,000 active gay and lesbian service members, including in the National Guard and Reserve. They've chosen to devote their lives and to service of our country. In my district in San Diego, there are thousands of retired veterans and active duty personnel that would love to serve openly and have their service recognized. The time has come to let willing and able persons serve the country we all love, and I sincerely ask for your support in sending this important message to Congress at this time. The resolution is sponsored by Equality California. It's supported by the Service Members Legal Defense Network, American Veterans for Equal Rights, and many others. And better than me telling the story, though I know I've gone on a little too long already, I have two former service members with me here today and some others. Joseph Rocha, who's discharged from the Navy, Zoe Dunning, board co-chair of the Service Members Legal Defense and retired Navy commander. Julian Chang, also a board member of Service Members Legal Defense. Julian, there you are, okay. And Jeffrey Coors, Executive Director of Equality California. I'm also delighted to be joined by West Hollywood City Council member Jeffrey Prang, who is here on other business today, but is willing to join us and speak out on behalf of this important resolution. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator. Your first witness in support, please.
Yeah, right there.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. My name is Joseph Christopher Rocha. In 1992, based on Petty Officer Schindler's murder, who was left his body unidentifiable and unrecognizable in a hate crime, President Clinton then enacted Don't Ask, Don't Tell, Don't Harass, and Don't Pursue. I'd like to discuss how that is working. Before the committee members, I've given you an investigation that was done in '97 into my unit, and that has this year been validated by both the CNO and the Secretary of the Navy. In items A, P, and BB, you'll see where, based on the assumption that I may have been a homosexual because I refused to have sex with prostitutes, which, whether I was straight or gay, I would have done anyways. I was tied to a chair, fed dog food, and left in a dog kennel that was filled with feces. In item E, you'll see where I was hosed down. Item D, where I was ordered and video recorded to simulate homosexual sex in military uniform. And item H, I, J, A, B, A, F, and C, A will validate that it was my leadership that asked, harassed, pursued, and indoctrinated other service members that I must be a homosexual and should be punished for it. This lasted 28 months. The only part of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, Don't Harass, and Don't Pursue that made it into the law is Don't Tell. I'd like to talk about the detriment of that. In item K and CM, you'll see that it took over 60 minutes for the investigator to convince me to even speak of what had happened to me. Much like Seaman Provost, who was harassed for quite a while before he was found on post, shot to death, and then attempted to have been burned to remove all evidence. You'll see in item BQ, CE, and CG that women were being sexually assaulted in my unit and then called out as lesbians to keep them quiet. Petty Officer First Class Valdivia in 2007 killed herself under the pressure of not being able to speak. There are photos of Petty Officer Valdivia, Petty Officer Schindler, and Petty Officer Provost in the package that I provided. As far back as 1957, for 53 years, thanks to the Crittenden Report and the Rand Report, we know that there is no detriment to unit cohesion under gay service. The APA and the AMA support us. The legislation is fiscally responsible, as the Senator had just mentioned, in the costs that it incurs to uphold it, the threat to national security, and the linguists, fighter pilots, and so on that we lose. And it endangers the lives of all of our young men and women, as you heard, both straight and gay, in the documents that I provided.
I'm going to like to ask you to wind up your testimony, please.
Absolutely. So before you today, SJR 9 gives you the opportunity to vote so that California can demonstrate to the country that it honors the military service of all of its members, given that there is no honor in Don't Ask, Don't Tell or its supporters. Thank you.
Thank you. Your next witness in support, please.
That's you, Zoe.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen. My name is retired Commander Zoe Dunning, U.S. Navy. I'm an Annapolis graduate. And in 1993, when President Bill Clinton announced that he was going to address the policy of gay service in the military, I publicly came out as a proactive act. I did that because during my time of service, I saw the impact of this policy on the lives of those serving, both gay and straight. The link with the policy with harassment, as Seaman Rocha mentioned. And so I proactively came out and went through a 2-year legal battle to stay in. I actually was an exception. I actually won my legal case, even though I made the statement that I am a lesbian. My panel of officers found that I should be retained. And it was an exception because after my ruling, the Pentagon issued a memorandum that basically prevented anyone else from using my legal defense. So I've had the unique opportunity to serve as an open lesbian in the U.S. military for over 13 years. Those who justified the policy use as their main argument that the mere presence of an openly gay member in the military will harm and ruin unit cohesion and morale. And I'm here to tell you, as a personal example, that I served for 13 years openly, and it did not ruin unit cohesion and morale. In fact, I was awarded several personal decorations and awards, and more importantly, my unit were the recipients of numerous performance awards. We won the Meritorious Unit Commendation, the Navy Unit Commendation, and the Joint Service Commendation. So obviously, my mere presence in my unit did not ruin the effectiveness of that unit's performance. Since that time, I've been very active through Service Members Legal Defense Network, advocating for the repeal of this law and providing free legal services to those like Joseph Rocha here who have been negatively impacted by the law. So I encourage you today to take a step forward, send a strong signal to the President, to the U.S. Congress, and to the Pentagon that this policy is wrong. It is hurting our national security. It is harming thousands and thousands of able-bodied service members, and that California is going to take a stand and say, no more, we need to repeal this law. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Other witnesses who will state their name, affiliation, and their support.
I'm Julian Chang. I'm chair of the Legislative Committee of the Service Members Legal Defense Network. I ask for your aye vote today. There are over 185 sponsors of H.R. 1283 in Congress, and they need to hear from you.
Thank you. Other witnesses in support.
I'm Jeffrey Prang, council member, former mayor of the city of West Hollywood. The city of West Hollywood has unanimously endorsed this legislation. We urge an aye vote.
Thank you. Others in support.
Jeff Kors, executive director of Equality California, the sponsor of the bill. We urge your aye vote.
Thank you very much. Other witnesses in support. Are there witnesses here in opposition? Seeing none, are there questions or observations from members of the committee? Mr. Monning, then Ms. Brownlee.
I want to thank the senator for bringing this before our committee and all of those who have testified. Mr. Rocha, your title, I missed your rank.
I was a petty officer 3rd class, and I resigned from the Naval Academy Preparatory School under this policy.
Well, I want to thank you both for your testimony. My question of you, some of the conduct cited in the memorandum that you shared, was there any disciplinary action against any of the perpetrators of the harassment?
The CNO has decided to force retire Chief Toussaint, but we'll all be paying through taxes for all of his benefits for at least the next 20 years. So in reality, there's been no punishment for it, and it just shows that the don't harass, don't pursue, it doesn't exist. It's not enforced by law.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Monning. Ms. Brownlee, and then Ms. Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to have the opportunity to express my support of this resolution and thank the senator for bringing it forward. It certainly was, I think, a black eye for our society when the Clinton administration made this policy, and it was certainly the wrong decision then, and it's certainly the right decision to make that wrong a right today. And so I just am very thankful that you've brought this forward. I appreciate all the people who have come to testify in support of this and to make this statement. And I hope very much that this moves through the legislature and gets sent to Washington, and we get to work on reversing this really bad policy for a very, very long time. I mean, the military is a community just like any other community, and to have this kind of discriminatory policy is just, I don't know what the word is, but it's not good and bad, and it's time for us to reverse it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brownlee. Ms. Evans.
One word would be indefensible.
There you go. Thank you.
And I just want to, I don't want to repeat what was recently said. I share in everything that's just been stated, and I want to thank you for bringing this forward, and also ask that I be added as a co-author whenever that's possible.
Alrighty. Thank you.
Me too.
Alrighty.
Thank you very much, Ms. Evans, Ms. Brownlee, Mr. Monning. Others who wish to express an observation, we do not yet have a quorum of the committee, so we won't be yet voting on this measure, Senator. I know you need to go back to the Senate summit in which you're engaged. I want to add just a word from the position of chair. You know, I think the major critique of allowing LGBT people in the military is that it affects military readiness, and I think that the comments you made that indicate other military organizations around the world which don't have a similar policy, but which are often looked to as models for our military, make very clear that it's possible to both respect the individual rights of all members of our society and have a military that is ready for anything. And I would urge a support position when this measure is actually voted on. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Thank you to your witnesses for your testimony, and I will say for your courage.
Thank you.
All right. We'll proceed next to item number 2, AB 634, by our colleague, Ms. Harkey. Ms. Harkey, welcome.
Whoop. These big folders. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair and members. This has started out to be just a local bill, but it actually affects statewide. It is the objective of AB 634 is to include scuba diving on the list of hazardous recreational activities such as animal riding, horseback riding, as I and your cousin do, bike racing, kayaking, skiing, rock climbing, surfing, and water skiing. AB 634 will remove or limit liability to local governments from scuba diving and encourage artificial reef growth in our oceans. The sponsors of this bill, Ships to Reef, seeks to grow artificial reefs on submerged vessels along the California coast. Their work is important for the following reasons. Artificial reefs help to enhance fish populations. Submerged vessels upgraded by Ships to Reef attract divers and make for an overall safer ocean and diving experience. Scrapping submerged vessels in California provides jobs and helps restore ocean floor to a more natural state. AB 634 would ease the permitting processes for obtaining leases for ship-based artificial reefs. Excuse me. It's early in the morning. The State Lands Commission owns the sea bottom from the mean high tide to 3 miles offshore, as you know, and as such does not wish to assume liability for any diver who may choose to go out on their own with no liability waiver signed, which is typical with a formal diving program. Without this bill, government entities are vulnerable to a situation if a diver is injured or dies, which could lead to lawsuits against the government with jurisdiction. Coming from a city that has been sued as deep pockets, it's quite prohibitive to be allowing a lot of activities because you know that you are ultimately going to be responsible no matter who's involved. So this would help that. Without the approval of this bill, it's highly unlikely that the State Lands Commission would agree to lease areas for sea bottom for ship-based artificial reefs. And the reason they want to lease is because they want to get the state out of the liability function as well. This bill is supported by California Ships to Reef, the City of Dana Point, the Civil Justice Association of California, and the Orange County Board of Supervisors. And I believe the Consumer Attorneys of California have adopted a neutral position, and so I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you very much, Ms. Harkey. First witness in support.
My name is Dean Reeverts. I'm the Vice President for Reef Development for California Ships to Reefs, and basically these projects are a win-win-win. We can get rid of decommissioned vessels that are now sitting in Suisun Bay causing problems. We can enhance the ocean environment, and we can bring massive amounts of tourism dollars into California. Other than that, I ask for your aye vote, and I'm here to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Next witness in support.
Brian Lundgren on behalf of the Orange County Board of Supervisors in support.
Thank you. Other witnesses in support.
Kim Stone with the Civil Justice Association of California in support.
Thank you. Are there other witnesses who support this measure? Are there witnesses here in opposition to this measure? I believe there is no opposition to the measure. All right. Colleagues, questions or comments on this bill? All right. Again, we don't yet have a quorum. Thank you very much for your presentation, Ms. Harkey, and for your witnesses. We'll be voting on this matter later this morning.
Thank you very much for your consideration.
Of course. All right, next item, we have Ms. Strickland, I believe, is here on item number 3, AB 973. Is that correct? Ms. Strickland? Good morning.
Good morning.
Please.
Thank you. Mr. Chair and members, I appreciate the opportunity to present AB 973, an important bill concerning adoptions. This bill will address a longstanding problem that's in need of a long overdue solution. Unfortunately, existing law really is not in sync with the California adoption process, and it creates problems for the mother's ability to responsibly place her child during that process. Current law requires an infant who is set to be adopted at birth, but who has been exposed to illegal drugs, may be taken by Child Protective Services and placed into foster care unless the mother can provide a copy of the petition for adoption. If a petition for adoption can be shown, then the child can go home with from the hospital with the adoptive parent or the licensed adoptive agency instead of entering into the foster system. However, this petition of adoption is not available until after the birth mother and the child have actually left the hospital, thereby making this requirement impossible to fulfill. This bill would authorize a prospective adoptive parent or licensed adoptive agency to take custody of a newborn that has been exposed to illegal drugs when it does not pose an immediate danger to the child, and the birth mother provides a signed form developed by the Department of Social Services in which it is stipulated that a copy of that adoption petition will be provided within 5 business days of filing, and notification will be provided to the welfare agency if the adoption plan is terminated for any reason. This important bill is the product of much input and hard work from adoption agency directors, adoption lawyers, and consultants who have a deep understanding of the adoption process and the importance of ensuring the well-being and safety of drug-exposed children and avoid having these babies go into the foster system and go home with their proper adoptive parents. I would ask for your support and have support with us here today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Strickland. First witness in support.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members, Donna Brownsey, representing the Academy of California Adoption Lawyers. I'd like to commend the author and her staff. We brought together all the stakeholders in this process, and also would want to highly commend the committee counsels who assisted our efforts, where this really was where the adoption forms were rendered the process unable to, parents and families and adoptive parents as well as birth parents rendered them unable to proceed because of the way the forms set out the legal technicalities. All of us share the concern of we all want to ensure that the babies are absolutely protected in this process, but allow, when there is an adoption plan, that a positive tox baby will not have to go into the foster care system because there is an adoption plan. If for some reason the birth parent changes their mind, this bill, as amended, sets forth a new process to ensure that Child Protective Services and the county offices are informed to protect the health and safety of that child. So we think this is a really good solution to what was sort of a vexing problem, and we just urge your support, and ACAL strongly supports this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next witness in support.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Kathy Sunderling with the County Welfare Directors Association. The two concerns that we had with any change to the current law was to make sure that we could feel confident that the adoption that the birth mother said was proceeding was legitimate, and to make sure that the baby was safe if the adoption were to fall through. We really appreciate everybody, committee staff, the adoption attorneys, and the author staff rolling up their sleeves and working with us to come to a solution that does both of those. So we support the bill and urge your support.
Thank you very much. Other witnesses in support? Are there witnesses here in opposition? Seeing none, are there questions or comments, members of the committee? Ms. Brownlee.
Just one question. I think this is a good bill. I'm just curious to know how many times and instances this actually occurs. Is it a frequent?
No, it's not frequent, at least in the experience of the Academy. When we represent adoption lawyers as well as agency providers. So it doesn't happen frequently, but it does happen enough so that in some counties, as the analysis noted, they just sort of look the other way and let the, because if there's an adoption plan, they let the adoptive parents take the baby. In other counties, they're a little more sticklers, and so as a result, the baby has to go into foster care. So there are not a lot of babies that we're talking about, and of those, it's a very tiny percentage where the birth mother seeks to reclaim the child. So we do believe this is a very tiny universe, but certainly in those instances where you have a prospective adoptive parent family willing to take this child into their home, we really would like to facilitate that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brownlee. Other questions or comments from members of the committee? Seeing none, again, we are waiting a quorum for us to vote. Ms. Strickland, well, thank you very much for coming this morning. Thank you to your witnesses. We'll be voting shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you. So our final measure besides our consent calendar this morning is item number 4. That's Mr. Perez, AB 1491. Mr. Perez, welcome this morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Please.
Good morning, members. Just want to go ahead and start off by thanking you, and we will be taking amendments by the committee. Mr. Chairman and members, AB 1491, as proposed to be amended, expresses legislative intent to have the Secretary of State conduct an investigation into the present operational status of the registry. As outlined in the analysis, the registry was established in statute in 1991 for the purpose of providing a place where women and minorities could submit materials in order to be considered for corporate board membership. In 1998, the Secretary of State sponsored legislation to authorize the transfer of the registry to a California public university. In early 1999, responsibility for the registry transferred to Cal State University, Fullerton. From documentation obtained from Cal State University, Fullerton, it appears that the campus maintained the registry from 1999 through 2002. After that, however, there seems to be some questions as to whether responsibility for the registry was formally transferred back to the Secretary of State. Further, there are questions relative to the status of the database, fees which were transferred and fees that may have been paid during that time that the registry was fully operational. With the support of the committee, we will continue to investigate this issue and then be able to correctly update the registry statute. Ms. Rhonda Pascal, who is the head of legislation for Secretary of State, is here, and I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perez. Your first witness in support, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. Rhonda Pascal on behalf of Secretary of State Deborah Bowen. And I do need to make clear that the Secretary has not taken an official position on this measure, particularly the committee's proposed amendments, as we just became aware of those late yesterday. However, she opposes the concept embodied in the amendments as they require the Secretary of State to investigate CSU Fullerton with respect to the registry. She is not seeking authority to conduct an investigation of CSU Fullerton with respect to this matter, and this may impact her position as the bill moves its way forward. I have provided to the committee chronology of the events that we were able to ascertain as it pertains to the registry. We have conducted a diligent search for records within each division of the agency as well as in the state archives, and based on the records that we were able to locate, we did prepare this chronology and have in fact provided copies of all of those relevant records to the author's office and committee staff. I won't go through each one of these, but again, as the Assembly member has indicated, certainly based on the records that we were able to locate, we can confirm that the registry was in fact transferred to CSU Fullerton back in February of 1999. That included approximately 50 applications at that time, along with a check for $2,300, which was the amount of fees that had been collected by the Secretary of State's office up until that point. Subsequent to that, the CSU Fullerton did in fact prepare a report in 2002, which we were able to find a copy of. We have, again, in our search, have been able to find no records, despite assertions that have been made by some representatives at CSU Fullerton that they transferred the registry back to the Secretary of State's office. In fact, the registry is not at currently at the Secretary of State's office. So I'm happy to answer any questions that I can in that regard, and certainly as the bill moves forward, whether it's in this particular vehicle or perhaps in future legislation, if there is a desire to reestablish the registry at the Secretary of State's office, I do need to underscore that it would be a brand new program and we would need the resources necessary to establish it and maintain it on an ongoing basis.
Yes, thank you for your testimony. I do want to clarify, I think it's more than a semantic difference, that as amended, the bill would not require the Secretary of State to investigate Cal State Fullerton. It would merely require the Secretary of State to continue the effort that you've described so far, which is to determine what happened to the registry.
And I guess as we're taking a look at the amendments, it seems that the open questions thus far really do pertain to the efforts that Fullerton undertook, which we don't have access to that information and haven't been able to, and it appears that we've not been successful in either committee of gleaning that information from CSU Fullerton. So it's not clear when we say investigation, does that require actual investigators from our office to go to Fullerton and pour through their records and try to piece this together. Again, not a precedent I think that the Secretary is fully supportive.
So you would like more specificity with regard to what investigation means, is that correct?
Well, I think that if, in fact, the questions still remain pertaining to Fullerton's activities with respect to the registry, that perhaps the committee may wish to consider whether it's appropriate to have Fullerton prepare a report to the legislature outlining their activities as it pertains to the registry. Because I think those are the unanswered questions that we have at this time.
Thank you for your testimony. Next witness in support. Okay. Are there other witnesses in support of this measure? Are there witnesses here in opposition to this measure? Members of the committee, are there questions or comments on the bill as proposed to be amended? Okay. Ms. Brownlee.
Well,
actually, Ms. Brownlee, before you ask, because we've been awaiting a quorum, would you mind if I interrupt you for a second just to call the roll? Let's call the roll, please.
Fuhr?
Here.
Tran? Brownlee?
Here.
Evans? Hagman? Jones? Knight? Liu?
Here.
Monning?
Okay, we've established a quorum. Thank you, Ms. Brownlee, for your deference. Please.
I just wanted to ask the author, is the reason and purpose for this bill is because this issue has not been able, parties have been together and it's just not resolvable?
Sure. And quite frankly, at the end of the day, the demographics are shifting. And we need to create more opportunities for folks of color as well as women and corporate boards. And so it's a two-tiered mission, if you will.
Yeah. Now, I understand the importance of the mission, but the purpose for the bill is because the parties, vis-a-vis the Secretary, Cal State Fullerton, have not been able to resolve who's going to be responsible for the registry?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Monning, please.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Mr. Pettis, for bringing this to our attention. In looking at this chronology, it appears like 2002 is the last time anyone knows what happened to the registry. In your dialogue with representatives of Cal State Fullerton, do they have any records? They say they sent it all to the Secretary of State. Is there anything that they possess, any information?
Again, I can only comment based on the records. This all occurred under previous administrations and, again, with staff that are no longer at the Secretary of State's office. We can only piece together based on the records that are with the Secretary of State's office. And after 2002, we find no further records from Fullerton in that regard.
Thank you. Do we know if, when it was operational, if there was any success in terms of this registry leading to the appointment to boards of corporations?
To my understanding, the successes were minimal, and there was a lack of documentation. But I think Ronna might have some more information on that. That's more technical.
Well, again, this is based on the 2002 report that CSU Fullerton did prepare. And while it did not address that I could find the fees that were charged or collected at that point, or how that might have increased corporate diversity among boards, it did address the membership, and it showed that in 1999 a total of 28 members were added. In 2000, 13 members added. In 2001, 8 members, and in 2002 there were 10 members added and 8 individual member applications still pending.
Thank you. That's helpful to get a sense, at least, that there were some successful placements. I guess my question is whether at this point, 7, 8 years later, whether resources and energies are best directed trying to figure out what happened versus charting a path to implement the goals of the original legislation in the future.
Sure.
So that would be my only question. I'm supportive of resurrecting this to a point. I would just rather see the resources be used prospectively to reestablish this mission as opposed to looking for records that perhaps will never be found.
Sure. No, I would have to agree, Mr. Monty. And I guess that's part of the purpose behind this as well, is obviously how we chart a new path forward, because I think this is very important, knowing that the demographics are shifting here in the state of California. But at the same time, it's important that we find out what actually did happen so that we can figure out how successful we really were and what changes need to be made to be successful.
And let me be sure that I understand that there's a common understanding in the committee regarding what authority rests where. And if I misstate this, I would like someone to tell me why I have misunderstood it. The legislation says in 1993 that the Secretary of State is required to maintain this registry. Subsequent to that, 5 years later, there's a measure that says Cal State or UC could maintain the registry, but the continuing authority is vested in the Secretary of State to assure that there is a registry. We're required to develop and maintain it. The question is, where will it rest? Authority given to Cal State and UC to take it if it wants to. Subsequently, Cal State Fullerton says, we'll take it. Isn't that correct?
That is correct, but current law also provides that for any campus that did agree to take and maintain the registry, that they were required to comply with all of the relevant laws that previously pertained to the Secretary of State at the time that the Secretary of State was maintaining the registry. All of those responsibilities were then transferred to CSU Fullerton.
So just so I understand, is it the Secretary's position that because of what you just stated, she no longer bears any responsibility with regard to the registry?
The current law, unfortunately, does not appear to have contemplated this type of situation where the campus might have decided, subsequent to the time that it was transferred to them, to not maintain it any further. It really doesn't contemplate what happens at that time. It doesn't say that the responsibility falls back to the Secretary of State. It doesn't require them to coordinate with us or anything of that nature. It's simply, once transferred to them under current law, they're required to maintain it as the Secretary of State was previously required to under current law.
Mr. Perez, do you have any further comments regarding where we stand?
Yeah, well, you know, this is why we're here, because it is a little messy, and we're trying to clean up some of that mess. And my hope is that we can move forward with this bill. We are taking the amendments. We'll continue to investigate this issue and continue the dialogue with the Secretary of State. And I ask for your aye vote.
Very well. Thank you. And I've heard nothing from the Secretary of State to suggest that she is not open to that dialogue as the bill moves forward, correct?
Exactly right. Jones is here, so we can take him.
Okay. Very good. I understand that so we have a quorum. Is there a motion on this measure?
So move.
Is there a second? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Call the roll, please.
Fear?
Aye.
Fear, aye. Tran? Brownlee? Brownlee, aye. Evans? Evans, aye. Hagman? Jones? Knight? Knight, aye. Liu? Liu, aye. Monning? Monning, aye.
Actually, okay, that bill is out. Congratulations, Mr. Perez. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar? Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. Call the roll on the consent calendar, please.
Fear?
Aye.
Fear, aye. Tran? Brownlee? Brownlee, aye. Evans? Evans, I. Hagman. Jones. Knight. Knight, I. Liu. Liu, I. Monning. Monning, aye.
Okay, the consent calendar is approved. Now we'll return to vote on the first three items presented to us in the committee this morning. With regard to item number 1, SJR 9 by Senator Keogh. Is there a motion? It's been moved. Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. Call the roll.
Fear.
Aye.
Fear, I. Tran. Brownlee. Brownlee, I. Evans. Evans, I. Hagman. Jones. Jones, I. Knight. Knight, no. Liu. Liu, I. Monning. Monning, aye.
Okay, that bill has 6 votes and is out. Item number 2, Ms. Harkey, AB 634. Is there a motion to approve? Is there a motion on AB 634? It's been moved. Is there a second? Second. It's been moved and seconded. Call the roll, please.
Fear.
Aye.
Fear, I. Tran. Brownlee. Brownlee, I. Evans. Evans, I. Hagman. Jones. Jones, I. Knight. Knight, I. Liu. Liu, I. Monning. Monning, aye.
That bill is out. And finally, AB 973 by Ms. Strickland. Is there a motion on the bill? It's been moved. Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. Call the roll, please.
Fear.
Aye.
Fear, I. Tran. Brownlee. Brownlee, I. Evans. Evans, I. Hagman. Jones. Jones, I. Knight. Knight, I. Liu. Liu, I. Monning. Monning, aye.
Okay. Now, that concludes our agenda for today. We will have a brief meeting on Friday morning as well, but it will be brief. And I will keep the roll open briefly to see if Mr. Hagman is able to join us if he wishes to add on. He's a new member of our committee replacing Mr. Nielsen. Mr. Tran may also be joining us for that purpose. We'll see how the schedule works. So I'll remain briefly. Otherwise, colleagues, with no further business before the committee, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.